It was a regular night in the emergency room until a paramedic whispered something that made my blood run cold. What he showed me in that hallway changed everything, not just for me, but for a renowned surgeon who, within seconds, saw his career and life crumble before his very eyes. What seemed like just another emergency case turned into the revelation of a military secret buried for decades, a silent conspiracy within the hospital, and a truth so disturbing it almost cost me my license and my life. If you think you've seen it all in hospital stories, brace yourself, because what comes next will make you question everything you think you know about trust, loyalty, and the limits of medicine. The automatic doors of St. Michael's Medical Center burst open at 2:17 in the morning. I was finishing paperwork at the nurses' station when I heard the commotion. 2 paramedics rushed through with a stretcher, their faces tense in a way that made my instincts kick in immediately. I'd been working emergency room shifts for 8 years, and I could tell the difference between routine urgency and something truly wrong.
My name is Olivia Henderson, and I've spent most of my adult life in hospitals. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were impossible to keep. Ironically, I ended up in Chicago, working in one of the busiest trauma centers in the state, where secrets seemed to be the only currency that mattered. I moved here after my divorce 3 years ago, desperate for a fresh start, and a place where my past wouldn't follow me. Little did I know I was about to stumble into someone else's past, a past far more dangerous than anything I'd left behind. The patient on the stretcher was a man in his late 40s, unconscious, with severe lacerations across his chest and abdomen. Standard trauma case, or so it seemed. But something about the lead paramedic's behavior caught my attention. His name tag read Collins, and instead of the usual rapid-fire medical update, he grabbed my arm and pulled me slightly away from the crowd gathering around the stretcher. "Nurse Henderson," he said quietly, his eyes darting around to see who might be listening. "You need to see this before anyone else does." My heart rate picked up. Collins had worked with our ER for years. He wasn't the dramatic type. If he was acting this way, something was seriously wrong. He lifted the patient's left arm carefully, revealing what looked like a standard military tattoo at first glance. But as I leaned closer, I noticed something odd. The ink wasn't just a tattoo. It was a series of coordinates and symbols that seemed to shift in the light, almost like they'd been designed to be hidden unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. "What am I looking at?" I whispered back. "That's what I was hoping you could tell me," Collins replied. "But here's the thing. When we found him, there were 2 men in suits trying to get to him first. They had no identification, no medical credentials, nothing. They just kept saying he needed to come with them. We had to call police backup to get him out of there." Before I could process this information, I heard a voice behind me that made my stomach drop. "I'll take this case." I turned to see Dr. Richard Callahan striding toward us. Callahan was one of our top trauma surgeons, brilliant and respected, but known for being cold and distant. He rarely took cases personally, unless they were particularly complex or high profile. This patient, on the surface, didn't seem to fit either category. But the look on Callahan's face told a different story. His usual composed expression had cracked, revealing something I'd never seen before. Fear. Raw, undeniable fear. And when his eyes landed on the patient's exposed arm, on that strange tattoo, I watched the color drain from his face completely. "Dr. Callahan, are you all right?" I asked, professional concern masking my growing suspicion. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he moved closer to the stretcher, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the patient's wrist, checking for a pulse. But I noticed his eyes weren't on the standard pulse points. He was staring at that tattoo, and his jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles working beneath his skin. "Everyone out," Callahan said suddenly, his voice sharp and commanding. "I need Nurse Henderson and 1 resident. Everyone else, find something else to do." The other nurses and the resident on call exchanged confused glances but began to disperse. Collins, the paramedic, caught my eye one more time before leaving, and I could see the warning in his expression. "Be careful." As the room cleared, Callahan finally looked at me directly. "Nurse Henderson, I need you to understand something. This patient is classified. Whatever you see, whatever you hear in this room tonight, stays in this room. Do you understand?" I'd never heard him talk like this. "Classified?" We were a civilian hospital. We didn't deal with classified anything. "Doctor, I'm not sure I understand what you're—" "Do you understand?" he repeated, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, but carrying an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Yes," I said, though I wasn't sure I understood anything at all. Callahan moved to begin the examination, but I noticed his hands were still shaking. This wasn't the steady, confident surgeon I'd worked with dozens of times before. This was someone who'd just seen a ghost. And as I helped him cut away the patient's blood-soaked clothing to assess the wounds, I
saw something that made my own hands freeze. Beneath the torn fabric, just below the patient's ribcage, was a small scar. It was perfectly circular, precisely healed, and unlike any surgical scar I'd ever seen. It looked almost mechanical in its precision. Callahan saw it the same moment I did, and I watched him close his eyes briefly, as if bracing himself for something terrible. "Prep for surgery immediately," he said, his voice hollow. "And Nurse Henderson, call no one. Log nothing. This surgery never happened. If this story has hooked you so far, go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now, because what comes next is going to surprise you even more." But the operating room felt different that night. Usually, surgery was controlled chaos, a symphony of beeping monitors, clinking instruments, and focused voices calling out vitals and instructions. But tonight, it was eerily silent, except for the steady rhythm of the ventilator and the occasional murmur from Dr. Callahan. He'd requested minimal staff, which was unusual for a trauma case of this severity. Just me, one anesthesiologist named Dr. Park, who asked no questions, and a first-year resident named Marcus, who looked terrified to be there. Callahan had specifically chosen people who either owed him favors or were too inexperienced to question his methods. As we worked to stabilize the patient's vital signs, I couldn't stop thinking about that circular scar. I'd seen thousands of surgical scars in my career: appendectomies, cesarean sections, bullet wound repairs, everything imaginable. But this was different. It was too perfect, too deliberate, and the way Callahan had reacted to it made me certain it wasn't from any standard medical procedure. "Nurse Henderson, retractor," Callahan said, pulling me from my thoughts. I handed him the instrument and watched as he carefully began exploring the abdominal cavity. The patient's injuries were severe, internal bleeding from what looked like blunt force trauma, possibly from a vehicle accident or a fall. But Callahan wasn't focused on the obvious injuries. His eyes kept drifting to that area below the rib cage, where that strange scar was located. "Doctor, shouldn't we address the splenic laceration first?" I ventured carefully. "He's losing blood fast." "I know what I'm doing, nurse," Callahan snapped, more harshly than necessary. I bit back my response and continued assisting, but my concern was growing. This wasn't how he normally operated. Callahan was known for his methodical approach, his textbook technique. Right now, he seemed distracted, almost frantic. Then his fingers found something. I saw his entire body go rigid. "Suction," he said quietly. "I need better visualization here." I provided suction while he carefully dissected through layers of tissue. And then I saw it. Embedded in the muscle tissue, surrounded by scar tissue that suggested it had been there for years, was a small metallic object. It wasn't shrapnel from an explosion or a bullet fragment. It was too uniform, too deliberately shaped. It looked almost like a microchip, but larger, with what appeared to be tiny filaments extending from it into the surrounding tissue. "What is that?" I whispered, unable to help myself. For a long moment, Callahan said nothing. His hands, which had been trembling before, were now perfectly steady as he carefully worked to expose the device without damaging the surrounding tissue. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear him over the ventilator, something that should have stayed buried. Dr. Park glanced over from the anesthesia station, but Callahan shot him a look that made him quickly return his attention to the monitors. The resident, Marcus, was staring at the device with wide eyes, clearly out of his depth, but smart enough to stay silent. I watched as Callahan carefully extracted the device. It was about the size of a large pill, made of what looked like titanium or some other surgical-grade metal. As it came free from the tissue, I noticed something odd. Tiny lights along its surface began to blink slowly, as if it had just powered on after being dormant. "Is that thing active?" I asked, alarm creeping into my voice. Callahan didn't answer. Instead, he placed the device in a metal specimen container and sealed it quickly, as if afraid of what it might do. "We proceed with the surgery as planned," he said firmly. "Repair the spleen, address the internal bleeding, close him up. And this," he gestured to the container, "this gets logged as foreign body removal. Metal fragment from unknown source." "Understood, Dr. Callahan," I said carefully. "If this is some kind of implanted device, don't we need to document it properly? What if it's medical? What if he needs specific follow-up care?" He turned to look at me then, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not just fear, but desperation. "Nurse Henderson, if you document this, you'll put this patient, yourself, and everyone in this room in danger. Trust me when I say that some things are better left unreported." "That's not how medicine works," I protested. "We can't just—" "Olivia," he used my first name, which he'd never done before. "I'm asking you to trust me. Please." The way he said it made my blood run cold. This wasn't about hospital politics or covering up a mistake. This was something else entirely, something much bigger and much more dangerous. We continued the surgery in tense silence. Callahan's hands were steady now, his technique flawless as he repaired the damage to the patient's organs and stopped the internal bleeding. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. As we were closing, the patient's vitals suddenly became unstable. His heart rate spiked, then dropped dangerously low. "He's crashing," Dr. Park called out. "V-fib." We immediately began resuscitation protocols. Callahan started chest compressions while I prepared the defibrillator, but in the chaos, I noticed something strange. The patient's lips were moving, forming words even though he was unconscious and intubated. "Doctor, look," I said, pointing. Callahan paused in his compressions and leaned closer to the patient's face. Whatever he saw there made him go completely pale. His hands, which moments ago had been performing life-saving compressions, stopped moving entirely. He just stood there, frozen, staring at the patient's face like he'd seen a ghost. "Dr. Callahan," I shouted. "We need to continue compressions." But he didn't move. He couldn't move. He was paralyzed with shock, and I had no idea why. The monitors were screaming now, showing a flat line that meant we were losing the patient. I shoved Callahan aside and took over compressions myself. "Marcus, charge the defibrillator to 200 joules. Dr. Park, push 1 milligram of epinephrine." The team sprang into action around me, but Callahan just stood there, backing slowly away from the table, his face a mask of terror. And in that moment, I realized that whatever secret this patient carried, whatever that device meant, it was connected to Dr. Callahan in a way that went far beyond professional obligation. We shocked the patient once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th shock, we got a rhythm back, weak but stable. The room collectively exhaled, but the tension remained thick in the air. Callahan finally found his voice. "Close him up," he said hoarsely. "I need to step out." "Doctor, you can't just—" I started. "Finish the surgery, Nurse Henderson. That's an order." And with that, he stripped off his gloves, threw them in the trash, and walked out of the operating room, leaving me standing there with a patient, a mysterious device, and 100 questions that no one seemed willing to answer. Thank you for staying with me this far. This shows that you feel the same thing I felt when I lived through all of this. So go ahead and subscribe and hit that notification bell, because what comes next changes everything. Fadtronair. Here is the condensed and translated version of your text in English, edited to stay well within the 6,000 character limit while preserving the narrative tension and key plot points. The surgery ended at 5:04 a.m. As we settled the John Doe in the ICU, I couldn't shake the image of the strange tattoo on his arm. I found Dr. Callahan in his office, staring at the blinking device we had removed. "Close the door," he whispered. He revealed a terrifying truth. The device was proof of a 1990s military program designed to create perfect soldiers through neural manipulation and biometric tracking. "I know it's real because I helped create it," he admitted. Callahan, whose real name was James Morrison, had been a young military surgeon. He believed he was saving lives, only to realize later that soldiers were being implanted without consent. When he tried to blow the whistle, his evidence vanished, and his life was threatened. He took a deal, a new identity in Chicago, in exchange for silence. The patient was Subject 27. His tattoo was a permanent serial number embedded with particles that would kill him if removed. "The moment we activated that device in surgery, they knew exactly where he is," Callahan warned. Suddenly, a text arrived from the ICU. The patient was awake and asking for Dr. Morrison by name. We entered the ICU to find the patient alert. "Corporal Daniel Vasquez," he introduced himself, or Subject 27. He dropped a bombshell. Of the original 43 soldiers, only 17 remained. The rest had died in accidents or mysterious illnesses caused by the devices. Vasquez explained he had been set up and left for dead to draw Callahan out of hiding. "They are cleaning house," he warned, mentioning a whistleblower named Marcus Chen who was recently murdered. Then came the most chilling revelation. Every soldier had a secondary device embedded at the base of the skull, integrated with the spinal nerves. "This one has kill switch capability," Vasquez said. "They can trigger a stroke or heart attack remotely." Vasquez had encrypted files proving everything, hidden in multiple locations as leverage. He needed Callahan's surgical expertise to remove the primary devices from the remaining survivors before they were all executed. The decision was made for us when security warned that federal agents were approaching. We forged a discharge, hid Vasquez in a wheelchair, and navigated the hospital's service tunnels. Just as we reached the exit, 2 men in suits, Agents Hartley and Chen from the DIA, blocked our path. Hartley claimed the DIA wasn't the enemy, but was actually investigating the ghosts behind the program. He gave us a 72-hour window to gather the survivors and remove the devices. He provided a clean car and a warning: don't use credit cards or phones. These people have resources you can't imagine. We fled Chicago for a remote cabin in Wisconsin. At the cabin, we mapped out the survivors. The devices were leaking heavy metals, causing biological failure. We used shortwave radio to send coded messages. 9 survivors agreed to meet at a clinic in Montana, owned by Thomas Rivera, another subject. We reached Rivera's clinic on the 3rd day. It was a makeshift field hospital. Callahan began the surgeries at midnight. One by one, the men were freed from their primary implants. But during the 5th surgery, Rivera burst in. "Someone is accessing our security feed. They're coming." Former soldiers took up defensive positions as unmarked SUVs approached. A 3-way firefight erupted between the DIA, a mysterious tactical team, and the survivors. Under the sounds of gunfire, Callahan finished the final surgery on Rivera. We evacuated through a northern logging trail just as reinforcements arrived. We handed the evidence to Hartley. 6 months later, the story broke globally. James Morrison finally testified under his real name before Congress. 17 individuals were indicted, and the program was officially condemned. A year later, standing at a memorial for the fallen soldiers, Callahan asked if I regretted losing my old life to help them. I looked at the healthy survivors and answered, no, not for a second. And this journey changed how I view medicine and trust. Some truths are too dangerous to stay buried. Do you think I should have exposed everything from the start, or was I right to wait for the evidence? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more real-life stories. The next one is even more disturbing. Would you like me to elaborate on the technical specifications of the neural implants, or provide more details on the congressional hearings?